Hi, and welcome to the Fresh Hell podcast. I'm Annie.
And I'm Johanna, and thanks for tuning in today.
How are you?
I'm fine. We have nice weather today, and I finished binging The Americans with my husband, and I'm still super upset. I cried so hard in the end. Really, it's
No spoilers,
no
but yeah,
spoilers,
that
but
show is amazing.
you know this feeling when you watch a show for a long time, and I think I started to watch the first 3 seasons without my husband, and then watched everything again with him.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know when characters you feel like they're your friends, and
Yes.
then all of a sudden it's over, and you're like, no,
Yeah, it's,
what's gonna happen to them? You can't leave me like this. Yeah. So
I
I'm
felt
still a
like
little bit upset.
the way they ended that series, it's a great series. If you haven't seen it, check it out. But I think the way they ended it left it very open for a spin-off.
Well, my husband had an idea for a spin-off. They
Yeah.
should do a sitcom with Oleg and Stan. They're living together as roommates, and every week we see their super funny stories.
Oh, I love it. That would be good.
Did you
So
watch Game of Thrones lately?
I did. It was dark and full of terrors, but that's
It
all
was
I'm going to say
super
about it.
dark. I mostly couldn't see anything. It was so
Yeah,
dark.
that episode 3 was so dark. It was, we need to rewatch it. I need to
Yeah.
rewatch. Yeah, I feel like I always have to rewatch those episodes.
All right. So what fresh hell are we going to discuss today?
Today, I wanted to mix it up a little bit, and we're going to do one of my favorite unsolved mysteries. This episode is about the very mysterious death of Zigmund Adamski. It's still such a head scratcher, and honestly, even with all the theories out there, it's just,
There are so many theories, and we'll get into them.
yeah, we will, definitely. And despite everything we've read, I still don't think there's any explanation that totally makes sense for this story.
This is going to be really interesting, but before we get into the facts of the case, do you have any warnings for our listeners?
I do not. I mean, someone dies, but it's not at all gruesome. It doesn't involve animals or children, and there aren't even really any. In fact, there are no photographs. And it might not even be a murder. So it's just a really, really weird story. If you're into weird stuff, but like less into murder, this is your episode.
I read a little bit when you told me what you're gonna do as the next episode, but I honestly can't wait to hear the whole story, and I think you will have so much more information for all of us. So please, please tell me everything.
Okay, so Zygmunt Adamski, he grew up in Poland, but I think it was sometime around 1960. He and his wife, I think it's pronounced Leocadia. She was known as Lottie, so we're going to call her Lottie from now on. They moved to England and they settled in Tingley in West Yorkshire in the northern part of England. It's kind of halfway between London and Scotland. I say that because I feel like people always want to know where things are in relation to London. I have a lot of family and friends in England, and if I've been over recently and tell people, oh, I've just been to Worcester or Manchester or whatever, they always say, oh, how close is that to London? And Tingley is about 3.5 hours from London and about the same again to the Scottish border. Yeah, I don't know why. People always want to know that kind of thing.
I can understand that people want to relate to the place that they know or heard about, but I have to say one thing about London. It's not for me. I went there with my
Really?
husband. Yeah, I gave it to him as a gift for our wedding, for our first wedding anniversary, and
Our
we went
worst
there to.
wedding.
It was our first and our worst. Um, and we went to London together, and I mean, it's a pretty city, like all or most European cities are, but it's too many people, first of all, and it's just, I don't know, there's something missing. It's not for
Mm.
me.
I love London. Well, I like it a lot better than New York City, that's for sure. But yeah, I love London. But that's all right. So, but yeah, it's funny when I'm overseas, I'll always say that I'm from Boston just because people outside the US won't really know where Cape Cod is. And it's so funny to me how often someone will say, "Oh yeah, I've got a cousin in California. Do you know Bob Smith?" And it's like, I have to explain that California is like the same distance from me as is Europe. It just makes me laugh because I'm not judging. It's just my sense of geography is really terrible.
Well, at least people don't always confuse you for an Australian. And no, there are no kangaroos in Austria, and we have Vienna, not Vegemite here. Anywho, please continue with the story.
Yeah, so Zygmunt and Lottie, they have a really nice life in England. He finds work as a collier, which, as we all know, is someone who raises collie dogs for a living. I'm kidding. He's a coal miner. Collier means coal miner, and I think it's kind of a great word, and I'm going to stick with it for a while. And they are happy together. They're nice members of their community, and they're clearly devoted to each other. Lottie had MS. When her condition started to really deteriorate, Zygmunt tried very hard to get early retirement so that he could be home taking care of her.
He should have become a collie breeder, though. That sounds so much more fun than being a coal miner. And then he could have worked from home and he would have been surrounded by puppies the whole day. I think that's adorable.
I mean, wouldn't it be amazing if you could totally earn a living raising collies? Jealous of people who do that.
Did he get his early retirement?
No, he did not. He did not get his early retirement. It's now June 6, 1980. For some reason, this is one of those cases. I think it's because there's no photographs. There's like one bad blurry photo of Zygmunt, and that's it. All the other evidence is still under lock and key. It's still considered open, I think, the investigation. So there's nothing. We just have nothing. And it's 1980, but it feels like, I think for that reason, it feels like another like 1920s story.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's just strange. So June 6, 1980, and family are all in town visiting because Zygmunt's goddaughter is getting married the next day, and he is actually going to give away the bride. So Zygmunt is 56. He leaves the house to walk about a mile into town to go get some groceries. I think he needed potatoes, is what I keep reading. And as he's heading out on foot to walk to the supermarket, he stops and chats with a neighbor, and he's never seen alive again.
This kind of stories always freak me out so much. Everything is just great one moment and the next moment, snap, you're gone. And that's why you should never ever leave the house in anger, I think. So, what happened to him?
Well, that's the mystery. That's it. So 5 days later, on June 11th, in Todmorden, 20 miles, 32 kilometers away from Tingley, where he lived and was last seen, Trevor Parker, he's the coal yard owner's son, he's begun the process of opening the gates for the afternoon shift when he sees someone lying on their back on top of a 12-foot high pile of coal. About 4 meters. This was at about 3:45 p.m. Hoping that it was just somebody who was drunk and passed out, he called the police. Constable Alan Godfrey arrived at 4:10 p.m. He discovered that it was, in fact, the body of the missing Zigmund Adamski. He calls for paramedics and spoke at length with Parker. So Parker informed him that when he left the yard that morning around 11 a.m., he was absolutely certain the body had not been there when he closed and locked the gates. Paramedics arrive, and they actually think that this death seems odd enough to suspect foul play.
Okay, so in the almost 5 hours from closing the coal yard, the body was placed there. That doesn't seem all that mysterious to me. I mean, there was certainly enough time to dump him there. How is this story even interesting?
All right, well, this is where it starts to get weird. So, first of all, his wallet and watch were missing, which is suspicious, but not particularly weird.
Okay, so a robbery.
Not quite. So, the missing watch and wallet were not the only thing. What was weird was the way he was dressed. So he was wearing a suit, but he had no shirt on, and everything was slightly off. So, like, his pants were undone, his belt was buckled wrong. I read his shoes weren't on his feet properly, so I don't know exactly what that means, but something's wrong there. His buttons were all misbuttoned. It looked like he hadn't dressed himself, or maybe he had been dressed by someone who didn't know how clothes work, or maybe he was just like me when the joints in my hands are all wrong and everything's inside out and backwards, and who has the energy to change it?
Okay, I mean, so he was robbed and stripped naked. Maybe he was raped. We have heard worse than that happen.
Yeah, I know. But in this case, his clothes were in good condition. Only his shirt was missing, and they really didn't think, based on the way he looked, that he'd been out in the elements for a long time. Also, his clothing and his body were very clean. There wasn't even any coal dust on him or his clothes, and it looked like he'd shaved the day before. So he'd either been keeping up with his regular hygiene and grooming habits, or someone had been doing that for him. He'd been missing for 5 days, but only had light stubble, like he'd shaved the day before.
Okay, so he had been kidnapped, maybe.
Maybe. So the next thing they found was that he had second-degree burns on his head, neck, back, and shoulders. And second-degree burn is when it like blisters,
Mm-hmm.
And there was also a strange green gel-like substance coating the wounds.
Like green goo? What was the
Mm.
strange substance? I mean, they must have figured out what it is.
Well, that's the really weird part. They didn't. Tests were run on this substance by the Home Office laboratory, and they couldn't determine what it was. So, like I said before, all of this is happening in 1980. I tried very hard to find out how good mass spectrometry was at the time. There was a British Association for mass spec fans, and that was
Yeah.
formed in 1965. So it had been around for a while, but I'm honestly just not sure how advanced it was. My first thought was when I heard green goo on burns, right? I'm sure you thought the same, like, okay, so it's aloe, right?
Yeah. Right.
But if it were aloe, I think they definitely would have been able to determine that with the equipment they had at the time. So if I'm wrong about that, please let me know because I'm legitimately interested.
Hmm. Okay, yeah, I'll admit that this is rather peculiar. A green goo covering some burns that could not be determined. I think it's safe to say that in the 1980s technology was good enough to determine known matter, so he's found oddly dressed, laying on his back, spotlessly clean on top of a pile of coal.
Yes. And the pile of coal hadn't been disturbed. So I think this maybe if one person had climbed up the coal pile, it wouldn't necessarily disturb it. But if he was dragged and dumped by somebody, then I don't know. I think I just expect there'd be more of a disturbance. But everything that you read says it looked like he'd been dropped from above.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. A pile of coal is fucking hard to climb. It is. Not
Have
that
you
I ever
done
tried. Not that I ever tried. No, but my father used to have a oven that was fired with coal, so I know a little bit. Not a lot, but a little bit.
Yeah.
It seems unlikely that there would be no signs of a body being dragged up on top on a 4 meter high pile of coal, I think you said.
It's weird. And they also noted, and this part creeps me out, honestly. It just kind of almost makes me glad there aren't any photos. Godfrey went on to say later that he would never forget the look on Adamski's face. He said, quote, "Those eyes were staring up at me. I was looking down on him from a foot away. Those eyes sent a shudder down my spine. They were wide open. He had the look of someone who had seen something or someone that had scared him to death." And then he added, quote, "Something or someone put him on top of that pile of coal and something scared him to death," end quote.
Creepy. What could it have been? Who or what could scare a grown-ass man to death? Clearly, there must have been a cause of death.
Yeah, so it really looks like maybe something did scare him to death, though, because I think the coroner kind of agreed. They did an autopsy and they placed the time of death to have been sometime between 11 a.m. and 1 p.m. on the day that he was found. And he appeared to have eaten well for 5 days he was missing, but not on the day he died. So he wasn't malnourished, but his stomach was empty. They also determined that the burns had happened 2 days before his death based on how they were healing.
Okay, but that sounds as though the green goo was indeed some kind of ointment.
Yeah, I agree with that. The police investigation failed to reveal any record of Zygmunt receiving treatment at any hospital during his 5 missing days. There were no other significant marks on his body, no ligature marks, no bruising, no wounds, except for those weird burns, which I really wish we had photos of.
Does there an exact description exist or a drawing maybe of the wounds?
If it does, I haven't been able to find it. The burns are described as unusual and second degree. Like we were saying before, it's the kind of burn you have a blister and it pops and, it has a while to heal. But I think it's safe to assume from what we haven't heard, right? So I think if it was something that looked like a cigarette burns or like a car lighter burn, it would have been described that way. So
Hmm.
I haven't really been able to find exactly what the burns look like. But after a few months, they couldn't really find any other reason, so the official cause of death was listed as a heart attack. Later, PC, which stands for police constable, PC Godfrey spoke to the pathologist who had carried out the post mortem on Adamski's body, and he said it was a classic case of someone who had been scared to death. Godfrey said he still has no idea how the body ended up on the coal pile. He said, quote, "How he got there, I don't know. I think something put him there."
Something.
Yes, this is where things get very strange. The area around Todmorden and the Pennine Mountains has been known as a hotspot for paranormal activity. Witches were burned, lots of haunted buildings, and of course, UFOs. So, do you believe in UFOs?
Um, let's say it like this. I do not believe in UFOs. That means I'm definitely not Fox Mulder. I'm speaking here from a strictly scientific and statistical point of view. It could be possible that there are other life forms out there. Do I believe they are highly advanced and visit us in their freaking awesome spaceships? I highly doubt it. How about you?
Yeah, I think in the first episode we did, you had said how ghosts were something you really hoped weren't real because they scared you.
Hmm.
That's how I feel about aliens. It's kind of my scary thing. So I believe in UFOs. I just think there have been too many credible sightings, but I'm also not saying it's aliens, you know. But that said, I think there probably is other intelligent life out there. It seems very I don't know. It seems, is hubris the right word to think that we're the only intelligent life in the universe? You know, it just seems
Mm,
very self-centered to think
yeah.
that we're the end all be all. I just don't know why they would want to bother with us because I don't know. I think humanity kind of sucks most of the time.
I mean, come on. We as humans, we don't all suck. I'm sure aliens have their sucky assholes too. I mean, look at the face huggers. I mean, there's some really horrible aliens there.
So until just recently, I had never seen. Paul actually made me watch Close Encounters. And Alien. I had to watch Alien. I've seen all the Aliens now, which they're good movies. I was scarred. I was terrified as a child by E.T.
Don't even get me started on E.T. though. I cried for days after watching that movie. I mean, the poor little E.T. in his oxygen tent, all sick and grey, and all he ever wanted to do was call home, and somebody could come and pick him up. And I'm tearing up again.
I hate that movie. So my mom took my little sister and I to see it in the theater, and we only made it to the part in the very beginning where the dog runs under the swing. My sister, when she was little, and she would have been little here, like 3 or 4, she used to have this move anytime and she was shy, so this happened a lot. If she was frightened or just didn't want to be part of a situation, she'd just grab my mom's shirt, lift it up as high as she could, and then try to pull it down over her head as well so that she was like under mom's shirt. I started to cry, so we left the theater and then we watched it later on at home from the safety of home. And yeah, I still think it's the worst. The first 3 quarters of that movie, I think he's just super creepy with like spider leg fingers. He keeps reaching out to touch you with, and he's got that sort of like dead inside, raspy voice. Like that's the voice you'd get if you've worked in phone sex for 20 years, chain smoking unfiltered camels. He's like, Allie, ah. It's like, it's awful. Why? Why? And then just to fuck with you, it goes from creepy and disturbing to disturbing and gut-wrenchingly sad, and you're just sobbing. The whole thing is just the worst.
Come on, E.T. is adorable. He's just sad, but who is really creepy is Elliot. But that's a whole other discussion there.
Yeah, we're gonna have to talk more about that one later. Oh, well, there is one more thing I should tell you, although it may make me lose credibility. So in 8th grade, I would have been around 12, I saw a UFO. Now, I am 100% not saying it was aliens or even a spaceship. I don't think it was any of that. But my bedroom that I grew up in has a skylight over the bed. I would lie awake at night and worry because I was born that way. I'm compulsively neurotic. And so I'd count stars to try to fall asleep. And so I saw what I first thought. It looked like maybe it was Mars. It was like a slightly bigger than a star and a slightly orange reddish color. And then it got a little brighter and then it sort of just slowly faded out and it was gone. And then it reappeared a few inches over in the sky. And then it got brighter and brighter and brighter. Not like crazy bright, but like brighter than a star. And then it would dim, 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 and go out. And this just kept happening. And it moved to like 3 or 4 different places in the sky. And the next day, I actually asked my science teacher about it after class. And he looked into weather balloons for me, but there weren't any. It was just strange. It wasn't moving in a linear way. It moved around like it was really quickly disappearing and reappearing. So to this day, I have no idea what that was. You know, unidentified flying object.
Well, I'm certainly glad they didn't take you, unlike our buddy Zigmund here.
Yeah, exactly. But it probably wasn't aliens I saw. We live near an Air Force base. So unfortunately, I don't think I can say the same for our friend PC Godfrey. All right, brace yourself because you're going to struggle with this one. In November 1980, 5 months after Adamski's body was found, and a month before the infamous Rendlesham UFO sightings, Constable Godfrey had had his own encounter with a UFO less than a mile away from the coal yard. He had gotten a report of a situation involving some missing cows. Now, again, take this with a grain of salt, but a lot of the accounts say that cattle in the area kept vanishing without a trace from fields and then reappearing in other locked fields. I don't know what that's all about. I mean, I don't want to say it was aliens, but it was probably aliens. So he's driving around looking for cows, and I mean, there are worse ways to spend a night, right?
But let's be honest, there are also better ways. I mean, binge watching The Americans, for example.
That's such a good show. So, yeah, so he's driving around town, mooing out the open windows as you do, trying to attract a lady cow. We've all been there.
I hope his mooing was good enough to attract the cows and get them out of their hiding spot.
I bet he wishes that too, because he didn't find the cows. Around 5 a.m., just before dawn, he sees what he first thinks is a bus that skidded on the wet road and was blocking, like across the highway, kind of blocking both lanes. There were buses that would take coal miners in the area to and from work, and at first he thought it was one of these. But then he realized it was not. It was a sort of diamond-shaped craft hovering 5 feet, so what, a meter and a half or so,
Mm-hmm.
roughly, above the road, lit up and spinning. He tried to call the station, but lo and behold, his personal radio and the radio in the police car weren't working. Now, if this were me, I'd be driving away as fast as possible. I'd literally rather find a body than see an alien.
Annie, don't you know you can't run away from aliens? I mean, all resistance is futile.
You will be assimilated. Yeah. So I don't know. So that's what he must have been thinking because he doesn't run. He gets out a pencil and a piece of paper and he draws a picture of the craft. And that is all over the internet. So I'm sure we can probably share it. He then saw a flash of light and it was gone. He realized he was missing about 15 to 20 minutes of time and he found himself driving down the road away from the area where he had been previously. He later noticed one of his heavy duty work boots had been split and it kind of looked like maybe he'd been dragged. So initially he planned to keep all of this to himself. He was really concerned that people would think he was crazy, but he filed an official report when other officers said they'd also witnessed unexplained lights in the sky around the local moors.
I mean, okay, that sounds like he was shrooming though. You know, seeing weird shit and losing all sense of time. Not that I have any experience with these kind of things.
No, none whatsoever. But he was a responsible man, and he wasn't the only one who saw it. A lorry driver, which is how the British say a truck driver, was also had phoned in to say he saw the UFO. He was a very respected policeman, so he had made that sketch, and then later on, I think he was encouraged to have hypnosis done by the department. He told a story about being taken aboard a UFO and given an examination by two non-human entities. The UFO story made headlines all over the world, and he is considered by ufologists to be the first close encounter of the fourth kind in the UK. Let's real quick just run through what the encounters are. Yeah. Close encounters of the first kind. I didn't even have this. Close encounter of the first kind is a visual sighting of an unidentified flying object seemingly less than 500 feet away, so much closer than whatever
Yeah.
I saw, that show considerable detail. Close encounters of the second kind are where physical effect is alleged. So it can be like the radios on the car stop working, or an animal freaks out, or you're paralyzed, or you feel hot, or something like that. Or if there's impressions in the ground, or like burned or crushed vegetation, anything like that, that's the second kind. So first is like seeing, second is kind of more like maybe landing. Third kind, I think most people know that. I don't know where I found this note, but I wrote UFO encounters in which an animated creature is present. So there you go, like ET. Those are the main ones.
I mean, the third one, yeah, that's the one where you have to communicate via music, right?
Exactly. That's exactly it. And the fourth kind is abduction. There are more kinds, but I'm not going to get into all of them. Those are sort of the heavy hitters. And all of this, everything I read, I think this really ruined his career, and he was more or less forced out of the police force, which is awful because, as I said before, he was a decorated officer with a wife and kids. He's retired now, and he said in an article that I read that the story he told under hypnosis was probably just him recounting a dream. He said, quote, "I never said I was abducted by aliens."
I mean, it could have been a dream.
Absolutely. He said in a BBC article, "I wish I'd never seen the UFO, particularly because the effects it's had on my children. It's not easy having a policeman as a father, but when he's a policeman who saw a UFO, it's even worse." It's so true. It's just really sad. This was a huge turning point in his life. He left the police force and he now has a role as a speaker at charity fundraising events. So
Oh, that's good to hear.
Yeah, it is. He does believe, however, that it's possible that Adamski was taken by aliens. I guess that's the way how I would feel about it. His quote was, "I'm open-minded and can't rule it out." I think we would feel the same way, yeah?
Okay, yeah, I get it, but how about the other people that were involved in the investigation? What do they think? I mean, he wasn't the only police officer there.
Well, the coroner who dealt with the death and autopsy, he told the BBC in a 2003 that it was the biggest mystery of his career, but he wasn't convinced that there was any paranormal activity. He said, quote, "The question of where he was before he died and what led to his death just could not be answered." End quote. Let's talk about some of the theories we have.
Yay! Theories!
Theories. All right. So the first one we've already kind of touched on, and that is aliens. That they abducted him, held him in suspended animation, ran tests on him, caused burns, dressed his wounds with some alien goo, redressed him badly because they don't know how clothes work, and then they beamed him down onto a nice pile of coal. And I laughed when I was doing this. My husband and I were just watching some sci-fi thing, and there's like a guy floating in space, and the beam grabs him and saves him and pulls him onto the ship. And it was kind of an awful program. And I was like, well, thank God for the magic spaceship beam. And Paul was like, honey, he's dead serious. He's like, honey, that's a tractor beam. And I was like, are tractor beams real? And he was like, no. And I was like, well, then I can call it a magic space beam then. So these are the fights we have. But he's right. It's a tractor beam. Here are some of the reasons it might be aliens. That gel could never be identified. Nobody saw anything suspicious the day he was found in a coal yard, which was beside a railroad track. It wasn't an unpopulous area. You know what I mean? So it'd be one thing if you like pulled up in your car and like dumped the guy by the gate or something if you just wanted him to be found in a coal yard. Why would you drag him up a 12-foot coal pile? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
No sightings of him at all for 5 days. One of the theories is there was a really famous ufologist. I think it's ufologist. I don't know enough about this. And his name was George Adamski. And so one of my favorite theories is that the aliens came to get George, but George had already died in the 1960s. And so they just grabbed the wrong Polish Adamski. Like, yeah.
This makes me laugh so hard because first the fact that you said they put the clothes back on in a wrong way, and now
Yeah.
that they mistook somebody and they just were like taking another guy. I mean, they were like the noob alien abductors, right?
Yeah.
They just came out of alien abduction school and that was their first assignment,
The
and they
newbies.
just
Yeah.
yeah, they blew it. Sorry, I'm not convinced with this
I am
theory.
I am also not convinced. I don't think it was aliens. Another one, and I saw this one a lot, but it's ball lightning, that he was struck by ball lightning, causing the burns and also the heart attack. If you're struck by ball lightning, that certainly could both cause burns and stop your heart. But if that happened, then where did it happen and who took care of him by removing his shirt and treating the burns? Like, why wouldn't they have taken him to a hospital? And where was he for 2 days before he ended up on the coal pile? Who put him there? And then his burns, it's described as like, a series of weird burns, whereas lightning strike burns seem to be of a specific sort where like they'd have said this looks consistent with a lightning strike. So I don't know. I think we can just rule that one out.
Yeah, yeah, that one seems highly unlikely to me because I mean, if he wouldn't have had the goo, you could argue maybe he was, for whatever weird reason, standing on the pile of coal when the lightning hit him. But yeah, it makes no
Yeah.
sense.
Right. Because even then, though, you wouldn't have the ointment over the burns. Like if he was
Exactly.
standing on
Yeah.
the coal pile, because that was something I had read too, was that like, was he abducted by the KGB? Now, I don't know why the KGB come into play here, but there was one thing that
Because
I
he's
read that was
Polish,
like,
I guess.
yeah. So it was like, well, maybe the KGB had him and then he got away and he ran up a coal pile to try to get a better view of where he was because he didn't know where he was. And then he just had a heart attack and died. And it's like, maybe, but
Well, let me say, I watched a show lately and it's called The Americans. And if
you
the
know.
KGB gets you, you don't run away.
Right, exactly. Another theory is could he possibly have tried to end his life by jumping off a bridge and then just happen to land in the dump truck portion of a passing coal truck? And then he dies from his injuries and gets delivered with the coal. But again, they ruled this out because Paul told police there had been no coal deliveries for a few days. And also, they always talk about how he didn't have any coal dust on him. But I do wonder because I also see it as being described as anthracite coal, and that doesn't really mark you up the same way. So I actually found we had put a beam in our basement, and so they had to jackhammer down through the cement floor of our basement to put footers in for these new beams. So as soon as they left for the day, I got a spoon and got myself into the basement and started digging in the little holes that they had made, and I found a whole bunch of anthracite. And it doesn't mark you up. Also, don't you think he wouldn't be on the bottom of the pile if this happened? I don't know. It feels like none of it fit. And there'd be broken bones or some sort of trauma from the fall, and there wasn't anything like that.
The part where they say he jumped off the bridge and landed in the coal truck at
Mm-hmm.
yada yada yada. It's like, you remember the beginning of Magnolia,
I
the
don't.
movie with Tom Cruise? Because they're talking about how little tiny things can interfere each other and the outcome is completely different than what you expect.
Oh, like the
There's
butterfly
this,
effect.
yeah, exactly. There's this scene where a guy wants to jump off the roof to commit suicide, and a few levels below them in the same house, two people are fighting, and one pulls a gun and shoots out the window and shoots the guy who's just, falling down because he wanted to commit suicide. Therefore, he gets killed by the shot and not by falling down.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay. That's
that
cool.
reminds me of that.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think it makes sense though, do you?
I mean, it could be, but as you said, he would be dirty. He wouldn't be on top. I mean, he could be if they remove again some of the coal, but he would be completely dirty, and it's
It
implausible.
just doesn't, yeah, it doesn't make sense. So the next theory is only an explanation for the burns. It's not a complete theory, but the most common theory on eagle. Holy shit.
What?
Oh, bald eagle. A bald eagle just threw, holy, wow, it's gone. A bald eagle just flew through the backyard.
Really?
Yes. Holy shit. That's so exciting, bald eagle. Wow. I knew there were some in the area. All right. Sorry, sorry.
Gonna intervene. That's exciting.
It is. I thought it was a hawk at first. I was like, oh, that's not a hawk. And then that's exciting. That's exciting. I hope we get more eagles. Yeah, okay. So, sorry, that is exciting. Back to the burns. So, the best theory on burns is that they were from a type of acupuncture. So, his family had reported that he was getting a type of acupuncture called moxibustion. And this is like a form of heat therapy where they use dried plant materials, usually Chinese mugwort. Usually they kind of hold it above the skin so you would never get burns. But there is a type that actually intentionally causes blisters, like burns that cause blisters. So that's the best theory I've heard of in terms of what the burns could have been. But it just doesn't explain enough, right?
Yeah.
So he got the burns a few days before he was missing and a few days before he was found, right? Because he's missing 5 days and the burns were 2 days old. So if he had been to his acupuncturist, there's no reason that his acupuncturist wouldn't have come forward and said he'd seen him and treated him, unless they were wrong about when the burns happened. But I think that stuff is usually a pretty set progression. And that really only explains the burns. It could maybe also explain the ointment or gel that was on them. I've seen it written both ways as ointment or gel. It's possible it's an herbal medication, but again, wouldn't mass spec have picked it up if it was? And we just don't have, like I said, we just don't have any photos of burns to see if moxibustion burns are consistent with.
It sounds plausible. It explains the burns, but I have to say I don't even care enough about the theory to even, counter it. It's super dull.
One of the most well-liked theories out there is actually one that I don't understand why it's such a popular theory, that he'd either had a stroke or some sort of injury that had put him into a sort of fugue amnesia state. So he had known heart and lung issues because coal miner. So one theory is that he went to buy potatoes, had a stroke, or something else happened, and then he was taken in by people who looked after him until he died. Then they dumped him on a big fucking pile of coal so he'd be found, because that makes perfect sense. But they kept his watch, wallet, and shirt for their trouble. Like, it doesn't make any sense. It's crazy. There's no brain damage in the autopsy either. So
I mean, seriously, who would ever do that? If you would tell me the story about something like this happening in 1680, yeah, I could believe it. People
oh
were
yeah.
just, yeah. But 1980, no, no way.
No, call an ambulance. The
Yeah,
NHS will
exactly.
come pick him up and take him. Like you're in England, there is good medical care everywhere and
Yeah.
it's free. So, yeah. So now this takes us to our last theory and possibly one of the better ones. In 2005, I don't know how to pronounce this, Bufora, Bufora, which stands for British UFO Research Association. So Bufora investigators, they're debunkers more than anything from the little bit that I gathered reading this. So you know me and how I am. So I went into the Bufora pages or whatever. I was like, nope, just figure out exactly what they're about. Don't take a dive. So they started to look into the case and they really wanted to get to the bottom of it. They interviewed the Adamski family and they found that there had been a family feud happening when all of this went down, and that one relative had moved in with Zigmund and Lottie after getting a restraining order against her husband. So Bufora came to the conclusion that Zigmund had been probably kidnapped by a relative, held somewhere for that last 5 days where he suffered the fatal heart attack. And Lottie believed he was kidnapped and held somewhere like a shed until he died. I wonder whether that was maybe to specifically keep him from going to the wedding.
That's
But
a Hatfield and McCoy situation going on right there.
yeah,
Kidnapping
so
somebody because of a family feud, keeping them in a shed, and then he dies. Yeah, we know
yeah,
this kind of story.
I know. I just don't know. I mean, could it have possibly been the bride's father? I
Do
mean,
we
who was
know what exactly was the feud about?
No, unfortunately, we don't. And obviously, I have no idea if the person staying with them, whether her husband was the bride's father. I have no idea if that's even the connection. This is just wild speculation. We just don't know. But you do wonder whether that could have been the case and if he was angry or upset or jealous because his daughter was being walked down the aisle by someone else.
It's plausible. It's the most plausible theory that you told me about now. But there
Uh,
are still some things missing. The ointment nobody knows about, why the undisturbed pile of coal, why he was undressed or
yeah,
redressed in
I
such
know.
a weird way.
That's the thing that's why people love this story. There's just so many questions we should have answers to and we don't. So yeah, the best I could really come up with was that maybe the father of the bride was the same person as the person that the restraining order was against. So maybe he's held at gunpoint, locked up. So that would explain why there was he was held somewhere for 5 days but didn't have any ligatures on him anywhere. So maybe he was held at gunpoint. He had burns on him as part of torture. They were on his head, neck, and shoulders. So they removed the shirt as part of they could torture him. And then I don't know whether they looked down on coal miners and were making a statement or if they just wanted to be sure he was found. So they left him in a really visible place. But yeah, police never found any evidence of a feud like this.
I think it does look like a statement for something, because why bother if somebody dies or you kill somebody or whatever, however he died, however he was scared to death, whatever you
Hmm.
did to him, why would you bother dragging him up on a pile of coal? He was a coal miner. I don't know.
I know. It's just so strange. Why would they leave him on top of a pile of, I don't know. I wonder, was there an issue with coal miners? Like, was he having strife at work? Like, because he had wanted to retire early and he couldn't. It's a head
Also,
scratcher.
also having him undressed at one point could also be some kind of humiliation.
It could be. It could be. It's weird, right? It's just such a weird story. I don't know. We don't know. So that is the very mysterious death of Zygmunt Adamski.
It's a weird story. It's a head
It is.
scratcher.
It's one
I
that
get,
you'll think about for a while after
yeah,
you hear about it. It sort of stays with you. Yeah, I would love to know the answer, and I hope we someday do know the answer. It's still an open investigation, I think. So,
maybe one day they're gonna open up everything, in a
yeah,
few years, who knows?
we'll see. Fingers crossed. If they do, then I bet the internet could figure it out.
To our listeners, I think what you learned in this episode is to definitely watch The Americans.
Yes,
Do it.
definitely do it. Watch it. It's fun. Yeah, and then if you want a comedy, my most recent obsession has been Schitt's Creek. I'm obsessed. I love that show so much. You're going to love it. Thanks so much, everybody, for tuning in. This is a kind of a brief head scratcher case, but it's fun to kind of mix it up and do something a little weird and different every now and then. If you enjoyed, please rate, subscribe, please send us a message and let us know what you think happened to Zygmunt Adamski. Until next week, if you're going through hell,
Keep going. Tschüss.
bye.